I'm going to focus on teaching you guys two main things, and then we're going to talk about how you can weave that and execute into your portfolio. Okay, so for those of you who may not have a strategy, or maybe you do have a strategy with regards to your investment portfolio, but you're not like, super clear, you're wondering if yours is the best and you want something that's more straightforward. So I'm going to teach you a very popular strategy that is being advocated and also being used by a lot of different banks, wealth managers, wealth planners around the world. It's not just in Singapore. So this is something that you might find useful towards your own portfolio. And that strategy is called the core satellite investing. Now, Syfe has written a lot of useful content on this. So if you guys want to read more about how this looks like and what exactly, what does it mean and all of that, you can always go over to their website and read some of the content articles that they have put up. I've also covered this in my blog, but today I'm going to share with you how you can execute this and what does it mean? Why is this so popular? So the core satellite investing in straightforward terms, right? You see this picture, this graphic that we've designed here. The core basically forms the main part of your portfolio. So this is like the foundation. And what you want to focus on is generally something that's diversified. So you generally would go for stuff like global equity. You also have instruments like gold as well as bonds. Now, your allocation can differ depending on your age, your risk appetite, as well as your investment goals and your time horizon. But generally, most of us in a diversified portfolio would tend to have at least these three different asset classes. Now, on top of that, that's where you may from time to time want to be investing on emerging trends, or like upcoming sectors. And this is where you can actually have the satellites, which are like, satellite planets roaming around Earth. That's the concept of this graphic that I've done up here, where you can see, for instance, if you believe in the rise of real estate, like we all know, for instance, Singapore is land scarce. So REITs are very popular in Singapore. Property prices have been going up. We've seen that last year, even with a pandemic happen, property prices have been rising. So if you're a huge believer of real estate, then in this case, you may want to be invested in several real estate companies or REITs, and this is where you can add that as a satellite team to your portfolio. On top of that, maybe for some of you, you're been looking at, technology is on the rise, or electric vehicles is on the rise, or China is on the rise, and I don't want to miss out. So this is where you can also have other satellites which are in these sectors, and these can be growth companies or under a certain thematic approach whereby you can execute that and add them to your portfolio. So in this case, this is what the core satellite investing strategy is on the whole. And if you are, very clueless, you have no idea how to manage your portfolio, this is one great way for you to actually apply it. And it's also something that I do myself. I think the only difference is that for all of us, our allocations and how much we put to each would differ. So the core defensive versus the core balance, as well as the core growth, you can see are designed for different needs, and they are structured differently for each of you guys as well. If you're very focused on capital preservation, maybe because you have a lower risk appetite, or maybe because you're in your 50s and 60s and you don't want to take on too much risk because you are intending to take that money out in maybe, let's say, the next few years or even 5-10 years down the road for your retirement. So in this case, if you're looking at capital preservation, then the allocations will differ from someone who is really, really focused on growth. So someone in their young 20s, maybe, or even 30s, who have a long horizon in front of them, and they're with the mindset that, if I lose anything, I can always earn it back, right? It isn't too much, and I'm willing to take the risk. So if you want to maximize that, then there will be a core growth portfolio for you. And if you're in between, then there's also a balanced core. The allocation for the bonds, equity versus gold differ a lot. Remember, for the defensive one on the left-hand side, you guys can see there is a greater allocation to bonds and gold, which tend to be less volatile than equities. And we've seen stock prices go up and down, huge swings, right? You invested in the smaller market cap stocks, the swings are even higher. So you might not be able to take the shock of waking up today, seeing your portfolio down by like maybe say 20% or maybe even 15-30% because of something that has happened in the stock market, or even then 2 days later it goes up by another 10%, right? So it's very volatile, and if you can't take that, then in this case the defensive portfolio is not going to give you that kind of heart attacks. So it's very much structured more towards the bonds and gold. On the other hand, if you compare this to the right hand side on the growth portfolio, you can see that there is more exposure to equities, and hence volatility is going to be a norm in that portfolio. Of course, it's not 100% equity, so you're not going to be like dealing with huge swings overnight as well, but definitely a lot more than someone who's on a defensive portfolio. And if you think that, hey, I kind of don't want such high risk, I don't want such extreme swings, but I also think that the defensive one is too defensive, right? Then you can go for the balanced one, whereby half of it is based on gold, as well as the remaining being allocated between equity at about almost 40%, and then gold for the remaining 11. So you can see also on this screen here that the performance has also varied. So the defensive one, you take on lesser risk, lesser shocks. Therefore, the annual returns is at about 4.7%. Now, on the other hand, for growth, if you're willing to sit through all that volatile ride, okay, and risk that your capital might not be preserved, it really depends on the state of the market as well as the companies on the whole. So of course, if a 9/11 incident or another huge black swan event happens, then the growth returns may not be that fantastic. But when that happens, it's the whole world that's affected and not just your portfolio. But in this case, generally the growth ones would perform better because you're taking on higher risk. And then this is where you could get maybe 11%. But you have to accept that the price to pay for this is the volatility. So in this case, there's always one that you can execute for your own risk tolerance and investment appetite. And in this case, you need something for your core, that main earth that we were talking about in the very first slide. This is how you can actually execute it. So I think on the next slide as well, I have one last portion that I wanted to share with you guys. A common question that most of us would definitely think about, like, come on, I made it. We're all wondering, can I not use this solution? Do I really need to go through Syfe? Can I DIY? Okay, so if you're thinking about that, trust me, I've also considered the question, right? So you can see over here, Syfe has been quite transparent in what they invest in. So on the equity side, you might be wondering what makes up the equity, what makes up the bonds, and what makes up the gold. Are they buying like physical gold coins, physical gold bars, or is it my 四点金? So basically, you can actually see what they're invested in. And these are the different ETFs that gives you the exposure to the strategy as well as what Syfe believes is going to grow and help boost the portfolio. So you can study each of the ETFs individually if you really want to. Like, I'm that kind of person where I would, if I invest, right, I would go and look at all of the 12 equity ETFs individually, pull up the factors, look at what is in each ETF, and then study an expense ratio and all of that. So if you want to be super granular, you can do that. But if you're new and you don't really understand how to read the prospectus, that's fine. You can always still roughly look at what is each ETF and how are they designed, what are they meant to capture, how are they meant to help. So for example, the iShares MSCI China ETF or MCHI gives you exposure to emerging, growing Chinese companies and equities, whereby the iShares Core S&P 500 gives you exposure to the largest 500 global companies that's listed in the US market. So in this case, your goal is actually through SPDR Gold shares, and also your bonds are through Vanguard as well as iShares Bond ETF. So if you wanted to DIY all of them and go for the exact ETFs yourself, you can. There's nothing stopping you, okay? And Syfe even publishes their formulas and what makes up these portfolios on their website. But the problem is, why would you? And what's the trade-off? So let's get real. If you were to try and do it yourself, the truth is it's going to be a lot less efficient. Why? Because for every transaction that you make, you need to pay brokerage fees. So if you look at the equities, that's 12. If you look at the bond ETF, that is 5, and then gold is another 1. So 12 plus 5 plus 1 would give you 18 ETFs that you need to buy individually, and you need to pay 18 times for each of these transactions. On top of that, don't forget there's also sales charge per transaction, and some might even need a minimum investment amount depending on which brokerage that you're using. On top of that, if you are applying dollar cost averaging, whereby you just want to be disciplined and every month you put aside X dollars, that can be maybe $100 or $150, 1,000 every month. It's really up to your own liquidity and cash flow. If you want to do that, how are you going to do this 18 times every single month and pay 18 times the transaction fees? And don't forget, you also need to monitor and rebalance. So let's say if you go for the growth one, right, whereby equities were almost at 70%. Now, in the event that a lot of these rise up, okay, then the equities portion of your portfolio now becomes 90%. So it's super volatile compared to when it was 70. And you want to be rebalancing that back to 70. What happens is that you have to sell off some of those equity portions and then funnel it back into the bonds or gold, right? Now, if you do that by yourself as well, that's additional work, don't forget. And I'll ask you this question. Is it worth your while? For those of you with kids like me, would you rather be spending time with your kids or doing this all by yourself? What if you could outsource that at a very low fee? And it's not just low fees, it's cheaper than if you were to do it yourself, not just in terms of the fees, but also your time. And we all know our time is the most valuable. So if you think that and you understand this concept and you really can see that Syfe offers a very compelling solution here, because DIYing, I can tell you, is not easy. And you need to know what you're doing. It's more time consuming than anything else.